that article, we pointed to the legendary source of the Amaruca and Mayan Aztec knowledge as having been delivered according to their beliefs by the dragon of many names, most notably Kukulkan and Quetzalcoatl. But what we didn't take time to explain in that already lengthy article is how in the Mesoamerican pantheon, Quetzalcoatl is a demiurge who has descended into the underworld at this time to do, guess what, Steve, to rescue and to preserve the seed and the bones of the old ones.
Absolutely.
This is what we would call the remains of the giants or whatever that are in the underworld that the Bible talks about. He does that, though, in order to preserve that seed through the end of the fifth sun, the current time that we're living in now, so that it can be revived at the end of that time. Well, when does it end? December 2012. When the Mayan artifacts say that he's going to return with Bolan Yakteku and the other underworld realities, and then there's also going to be at the same time a descent from heaven of the 9 support gods or motherships or whatever in the world they are that are described in those fragments that we have there in Tortequero, Mexico, Tabasco, and one other place now that's been found that also speaks of the same prophecy. What's also important is this legendary figure, Quetzalcoatl, sounds almost identical in some of the pre-Hispanic writings. He sounds like he's none other than the legendary figure that the Sumerians called Gilgamesh, the Egyptians called Osiris, the Greeks called Apollo, the Old Testament called Nimrod, and that the world is soon going to know as the Antichrist, whose seed is preserved. And if you read the book of Revelation, it's brought up from out of the underworld together with end-time giants, I happen to believe. That's the way I interpret many of those texts. So what you're seeing is that in the pantheon, in the mythos of the Maya, they actually tell almost word for word the same story that you and I have discussed on numerous occasions from other extra-biblical texts like the books of Enoch and whatever, and the book of Isaiah, where it tells, and the book of Revelation, where it tells us that the time is coming in which up from out of the underworld, the beast is going to rise and is going to enter into Apollyon, Apollo, Gilgamesh, whatever, this legendary figure, he that was and is not and yet shall be. This legendary figure is coming back, or at least the spirit of that legendary figure, and it's going to inhabit the person we think of as the Antichrist. Now, in Hermetic iconography,
you better explain Hermetic iconography.
Well, okay, so
simple.
Symbolism, Hermanism, symbolism. In that kind of imagery, the beginning and the ending points of the sky are positioned where the ecliptic, the pathway of the sun, crosses the Milky Way. Well, ancient descriptions depict that hermetically, I almost can't talk now, depict that distance between those points as a snake that's called the Ouroboros. This is really famous, the tail devourer, that encompasses the heavens and swallows its own tail. That's one of the oldest mystical symbols in the world. It's in Aztec, Chinese, Native American mythologies, just all around the world. But in alchemical symbolism, the mouth of the snake is viewed as a place of arrival and departure of spirit beings. So gods, angels, Quetzalcoatl, whatever. You could also think of it as a wormhole. It's an opening or closing point where these gods can enter and disappear into, but that they use to navigate the dimensions of heaven. For example, the god Quetzalcoatl, who besides the conversations we've had, he's actually the most well-known Aztec deity. He's portrayed as either being or entering the Ouroboros on Aztec and Toltec ruins. And in some renderings, there's actually a ladder that's seen descending from the ecliptic, such as when Quetzalcoatl descends from the sky on a rope ladder. You can see that in some of the Mesoamerican drawings. But anyway.
Hey, Tom, it's important for people to understand, too, the word Amaruca. That literally means the land of the plumed serpent, okay? Land of the plumed serpent. And what's interesting, just to throw some really neat stuff out there, in the book of Forest of Kings, one of the most famous Mayan kings is Shambhala. Very tall, and guess what? 6 fingers, 6 toes. Mm-hmm. Well, I guarantee he isn't playing billiards in the underworld, with an extra set of fingers. What I'm saying is that the land of the plumed serpent, and that is so interesting, feathery serpent, and that translates out into, if you basically go etymologically take it apart, it literally translates out into the dragon that fell with wings, okay?
Right.
Gee, who does that sound like?
Well, it's a dragon that has the power of air.
Yes.
And so when you look in the Bible and it describes this dragon that's at war with the angels of God, and I got to tell you something. Before I headed to Lakeland, Florida, Gary Stearman called me because so many people were calling prophecy in the news, and they were concerned because they were hearing, these noises that they're hearing, this banging and clanging and all that's happening in different cities around the world.
Yes.
He called me one day that people were very concerned, evidently, that no prophecy in the news, but I guess in their town they were hearing these noises. And some people have described it as sounding like trumpets, but these people said it don't sound like trumpets. It sounds like the clanging of metal against metal. And Gary Stearman called me to discuss some other issues plus that and asked me what I thought. And I tell you, the description these people were giving caused the hair to stand up on the back of my neck, because the very first thing that came to my mind was it sounded like they were talking about swords clashing against other swords. And I said to Gary, Gary, is something breaking through now from another dimension? Is the war, the conflict between the angels of God and these fallen forces, is that conflict breaking out now to such an extent that it's bleeding over and we're starting to hear some of this? Well, I don't know if that's the case or not. There's no way to prove that, but it was the way it struck me at that moment.
Well, I got to tell you something. I got to share this with you. I think that you're onto something there, and I'll tell you why. 5 years ago, and I don't have the prophecy, but I'm going by memory, the Lord told me to warn His people that very soon the invisible would become visible, the things of their nightmares would become into their realm, everything they knew as norm would no longer be normal, and they would literally see the battle between heaven and hell played out before their eyes and ultimately be a part of it. Now, look, we know that all creation groans and travails for the manifestation of the sons of God. That's what the book of Romans states. But the thing is that beyond that, listen, how about this one, Tom? I never saw this until I think the Lord quickened it to me one night. It says, hell beneath is moved at thy coming, okay? Mm-hmm. Now, I used to think that meant that, everybody makes way for Satan when he gets thrown into hell. And I believe that can have a dual meaning, but I'm just throwing this out. Pray about it, everyone. I felt like it meant something different. It meant that hell from beneath is getting ready to come up on the surface at the coming of the evil one, in the category of woe unto you, inhabitants of the earth. For your old adversary, the devil, has come down and punked you, knowing that your time is short. I don't know if you've ever thought of that.
And not that way, but that's very interesting. That hell beneath is moved at thy, meaning the evil one, at thy coming.
Yes. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because again, here's the thing. I've heard, when I first heard the horns, it was interesting. I said, look, I don't know that God's necessarily going to allow everybody on earth to hear the trumpet judgments in heaven as they're trumpeted, but I said, I think everybody on earth thinks it's going to be Louis Armstrong sounding. And I'm serious. I think unless it's a modern jazz quartet, they wouldn't have a framework to reference it. But some of the stuff in the Ukraine sounded like almost, if you will, like foghorns, yet it was a transcendent. You know how as sound basically is it modulates. Okay, it has a waveform that travels through travels through space, the atmosphere, whatever. Not space, but the atmosphere. But this thing was more haunting. It was almost like, if you will, it was like a giant foghorn with no point of origin, but a standing horn emanating from multiple points. That's the best way to explain it. And that's just one in the Ukraine. So I guess now that everything in that 5-year-old prophecy, and by the way, if somebody's got a copy of that, would someone please email it? I've got all my tapes from every radio show I've ever done, and I just don't remember what show, and unfortunately when those are being taped, they weren't, delineated well enough. But the gist of it is the invisible's coming visible, and what you're talking about, the clashing of swords, I believe, Tom, that's not just speculation or juxtaposing your thoughts on the events. I believe that's really happening, because I can tell you that's identical, and how you described it as to the prophecy I gave 5 years ago, may have even been 7 years ago. But anyway, there is a prophecy I gave on my radio show, and like a dummy, I don't know where I put it, probably in my filing system, and who knows where that's at. But the point is that I think it's critical for people to understand the lateness of the hour. They can mock, they can sneer, they can jeer, they can deny, they can belittle, they can slander, they can damn, they can do everything they want. But that doesn't protect them from when their eyes are open and their ears are open, and something much bigger, something much more nefarious. And I can tell you this, one of the most important things that anyone has ever taught me was the Mr. Langley, sent to me by a dear friend. CIA guy said the entire purpose of transforming the Earth, and terraforming was my word, with the chemtrails, was to change the dispersion of light. When God sent the rainbow, you're going to love this, when God sent the rainbow after the flood, saying he wouldn't destroy the Earth by water again, by taking that rainbow apart, if you will, and absolutely interfering with the light realm, L-I-G-H-T realm, of the different frequencies of light, they're enabling these things that God, in essence, imagine this, imagine the rainbow as God created as being a barrier to the principalities and powers of the air. In other words, it was our, if you want to say, force field, the force of Almighty God to keep those things out of us as we tamper. And that's why the Lord says that he's going to destroy those who destroy the earth. But this man was one of the highest-ranking CIA guys, and on his deathbed, he basically had a conversation with a man I know, and that's what was given to him, the most amazing understanding of why HARP exists and all this stuff. The Mayans, the Aztecs, the Incas, the Egyptians, by the way, mummified their dead because they knew there would be a time when they'd be brought back to life. Not just, quote, in the Book of the Dead. They knew they were coming back. And so it's something that's important for people to understand. So what you're saying about the Mayans of 2012 seems to be the revolving door for hell on earth. That's the best way I can describe it.
Yeah, and the other thing is, people who may, think that the prophecy that you gave, the conversation around what are these strange noises on the earth, whether or not those particular noises are related to supernatural conflict exists, period. Or if you don't believe that, then you deny the Bible. That angels, there are good angels and bad angels, and there is supernatural warfare that is involved right now in the world around us. But we know that in addition to the facts of basic spiritual warfare, that there is coming a time where there is going to be war in the heavens. In other words, the conflict is going to be increased to a new level. And that was the point that when Gary, I can't even repeat exactly the words he was telling me, these people in this community and what they were hearing, and everybody was saying it sounded like trumpets, and what they were saying to him is it doesn't sound like trumpets at all, it sounds like the clanging of metal against metal. And the minute Gary said that, man, I could see angelic warfare. And the fact that it is so intense now that it is starting to bleed over from in their dimension into ours, because there still is no explanation about what these noises are. Now, it could be the government's doing experiments, it could be HARP, it could be something else. I certainly have no insight on what's going on. All I can tell you is what my first initial and immediate gut reaction was to the way it was described to me that day, and it literally caused the hair to stand up on the back of my neck. And the first thing out of my mouth was, Gary, is something starting to bleed over from the angelic realm? And it caused Gary to pause too, and then we had a conversation around that. Well, what does this got to do with what we're talking about tonight? Petrus Romanus, E.T., extraterrestrials, the Maya, Aztec knowledge, David Flynn. What it has to do with is that these Maya prophesied that their gods were going to return, and they set that year in the year 2012. And ladies and gentlemen, we're here. This is 2012. And these multiple prophecies, some of them are thousands of years old. All of them are at least hundreds of years old. And some of these predictions are from people who are very well respected within evangelical and Catholic Christianity, who esteemed these people as being people of God. Oh, one other thing, by the way, David Wilkerson, who tragically died last year, he also said, Steve, something that sounded very much like the description you were making, how that as we get nearer to the end, their manifestations would start breaking through, and people would start seeing things and hearing things that were historically unprecedented, that would illustrate that this conflict, this period of time, darkness against evil, the intensity of it would be such that it would literally start manifesting itself within our physical world. He said that in his book, The Vision, many years ago. At least I think it was in his book, The Vision. If it wasn't that, it was another prophecy, and probably now that I've said that, somebody's going to make me have to find it, which I'll do. But these cultures, they believe. So if you're talking about Viracocha of the Inca, Kulkulcan and Bolanyactecu of the Maya, Quetzalcoatl of the Aztec, they believed that these gods would return at the end of their calendar date, the year 2012. But what Flynn did was, first of all, he recognized, it's almost 11. Are we quitting at 11?
No, we're going on. You don't know that. From now on, time will be no more.
Steve and Tom, let me make an announcement to those that are listening on Blog Talk. You want to switch over to OmegaManRadio.com. That's the live, uncensored stream. Blog Talk will go off at the 3-hour mark for the stream, although you can still listen to it at OmegaManRadio.com, so no worries. Keep going.
And we also may have some questions from listeners. I get all of that. So I'll try to do this real quickly. But part of the legitimate interest that David Flynn had concerned not just the year 2012, the prophecy of the return of these various entities and all that, but how all of this stemmed from the obvious fact that, first of all, the Maya, they were either unquestionably gifted mathematicians and astronomers or something else, because they measured or had knowledge of the length of the solar year, for instance, way more accurate than did the Europeans in the Gregorian calendar. They precisely oriented their sacred buildings and cities with stars and star clusters, particularly, interestingly enough, Pleiades and the Orion Nebula, which is associated throughout the ancient Middle East with Osiris, Apollo, and Nimrod. The pre-Columbian book, the Codex Dresdensis, what's also just known as the Dresden Codex by the Yucatec Maya, it's famous for the first known related illustrations of very advanced calculations, astronomical phenomena. So the question then is, how were the pre-telescopic Maya, who didn't even have the wheel, how were they so uniquely aware of such important knowledge? And that's what's unclear. So that was what implied to a guy like David Flynn that there is a mystery here that needs to be solved. And what David discovered through a tremendous amount of research was that the Maya, the Aztecs, the Mesoamericans, they themselves, as well as did many other archaic cultures, they credited that knowledge as having been brought to them by ancient gods that came to the earth. And throughout Mesoamerica, it appears that they came through some kind of stargate, at least in their mythos. They have these big gated constructs that are built in Tiahuanaca, various other places, that they ascribed as a portal through which the god had a mysterious kind of key, and those gods would come. Now, that sounds like a fairy tale, right? But it's the only explanation we have from their history about where this unprecedented knowledge that they had that was far in advance of much of the rest of the world, where that knowledge came from. So what happened was, in 2008, David Flynn started making discoveries. And if you look at RaidersNewsUpdate.com/giants.htm, you'll see that much of the information, the size and the scope of it, simply surpasses comprehension. I don't know how many times I've read that article. David actually contacted me. He said, I'm using Google Earth and some other above Earth orbiting satellites. And once again, he said, I think I found something nobody's ever saw before. He wrote a bunch of the information, sent it to me. I edited it. I kind of cleaned up the language, if you will. So he and I kind of, sort of, wrote the article together, but none of the revelation was mine. It all came from David. Every bit of it was his. And what he found was mammoth traces of intelligence, carved in stone, literally covers hundreds of square miles. And I wrote at the intro of the article that, in my opinion, it was possibly the strongest evidence that was ever detected of prehistoric engineering by those ancient entities that were known and feared throughout the ancient world as gods. But I was talking about, of course, the giant offspring of the Watchers. Because what David did was, in similar fashion to how modern archaeologists, have recently found ruins of hidden Mayan temples in the Guatemalan jungle using these satellites, well, David, he used Earth orbiting satellites, and he imaged this vast network of patterns that surround Lake Titicaca in Bolivia, South America. They extend over 100 miles south into the Bolivian desert. But what's strange about them is that there are patterns that display geometric repetition, interlocking rectangular cells, mounds, perfectly straight lines that are cut deep through the rock into the earth, and it goes across everything. I mean, the topographical features, high plateaus that surround the lake, through floodplains, through hills, through cliffs, through mountains, these deep, straight, perfect lines that lay out these patterns upon the earth. There is no technology on earth that could explain how in the world these patterns were created. And I am still to this day astonished. I think, frankly, Steve, I think the only reason why National Geographic or somebody else hasn't picked that article up and wrote something about it is, first of all, they don't want to deal with the ramifications, and secondly, they have no clue how to explain what we're looking at. So
Tom, hold that thought, because we're going to get aced out with the changeover. Bruce, do you want to go ahead and announce it one more? And
yes,
we'll
sir.
Stay until we come back.
We need those out there that are on Blog Talk to now switch over to OmegaManRadio.com if you weren't listening there already, and you'll be able to hear this final segment tonight. We're still live on tape, and this will be available up in the archives later, the full 4 hours, for those that were on BTR and didn't make the switch. We're now live on the 4th hour. Continue on, guys.
Go ahead, Tom.
Well, I'll try to do it quickly, but the whole point is this. 12 miles south of Lake Titicaca, located within the center of an array of geoglyphs, there are megalithic ruins. There at Tiahuanaco. Many people are aware of these, by the way, and other New Agers have written about it. It's actually known as the American Stonehenge, the Baalbek of the New World. That's one of the titles that's given to it. And if you know anything about Baalbek, you've got these enormous stones protruding up out of the earth. You've got the what do they call it, the stairway of the giants there, where you've got a stairway going up into what at one time, prehistorically, was a giant temple. And in order to make those steps fit your natural stride, you would have had to have been just enormous, something like 18, 20 feet tall, whatever, for those steps to relate, to a normal stride walking up.
And by the way, Tom, the guy that has actually he took Dr. Muldeshef is one of the Ernest Muldeshef is one of those famous eye surgeons in the world. The only man to ever, I bet, transplant a complete good night an eyeball, even into the optic nerve. I mean, that's pretty good. He took one of Russia's most famous physiologists, okay? Actually, I think it was a professor at one of the universities, and he took him to Baalbek. And they actually have the footprints in that thing, and when I tell you the footprint, they have footprints that are in limestone that are huge. When I say huge, I'm not talking 36, I'm not even talking 48 inches. I'm talking somewhere close to 5 and 6 feet. Baalbek also has the largest single quarried stone in the history of the world, and it's called Stone of the Pregnant Woman. Saying all that, the point is Baalbek is supposedly, underneath Baalbek, is the largest hive, and I don't know, I can't prove this, but I was told this by guys that fight these things, literally, is the largest hive, or if you will, repository of giants and stasis, S-T-A-S-I-S, and it's interesting if people understand where Baalbek is, and again, in the Hebrew, they used to refer to a lot of those areas as the Valley of the Rephaim. And, you know, I argue with a lot of my critics and people who came after me. The Rephaim are the giants. The Nephilim are the fallen ones. And I make the distinction again that giants are not demons. Demons are not giants. The book of Enoch teaches that the demon spirits just came from the, if you will, the murdered or the giants that were slain. And that as these giants that were slain, their bodies are reconstituted through genetic engineering, these demon spirits will enter back into them, reanimating the body, and they got long memories, and they got the same appetite for flesh, you know, that they've always had. So it's interesting, isn't it? We hear about certain national soft drinks using aborted fetuses and stuff. See, what I'm trying to say, ladies and gentlemen, our entire atmosphere is being reconfigured for these things to return. And, Tom, do you remember the Norway spiral back in, what was it? Yeah. I think what people need to understand, even at Tiwanaku, and I was just told by a former park ranger in Utah, it seems like Utah and the Four Corners region of the United States, where they actually have an area called the Valley of the Giants, that the spirals, every place I have been able to type spirals, both to prehistory and I'm talking, you know, ancient history, the spiral was always a sign, if you will, of the location of a stargate, angel gate, whatever you want to call it. So remember who was in Norway when that appeared in the sky, and the blue beam. And if anybody doesn't know what it is, just Google Norway spiral, and you'll probably get the mail online.